Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to tackle a document that can seem, a little intimidating, the Constitution of India. But it's so much more than just a rule book. It's the actual blueprint for the entire nation. And our goal today is to give you a user's guide to the parts that really truly matter in your life. So let's jump right in.
First things first, you've got to appreciate the sheer size of this thing. I mean, when it was first written, it had 395 articles, which was already one of the longest in the world. But because it's a living, breathing document, it's been changed over 100 times and has now grown to well over 448 articles. Now, we're not going to read all of them, of course. The idea here is to zero in on the core concepts that define India today.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute basics. What exactly is India? From there, we'll dive into something incredibly personal, your fundamental rights. Then we'll look at the government's to-do list, see how the country's actually run, and finally, we'll cover the rules for emergencies and for changing the Constitution itself.
All right, let's start at the very beginning, page 1. The first job of the Constitution is to answer the most fundamental questions. What is this country, and who belongs here?
This right here is the foundation. Article 1 officially names the country India, that is Bharat, and, this is crucial, it defines it as a union of states. What does that mean? It means states can't just decide to leave. Then you have Articles 2 and 3, which give the national parliament incredible power. It can literally create new states, change boundaries, or even rename existing ones. Think about when Uttarakhand was carved out of Uttar Pradesh. That happened because of this power.
Okay, so once the territory is defined, the next question is, who are the people? Part 2, that's Articles 5 through 11, lays out who is considered a citizen when the Constitution was adopted. But the really important thing to remember for today is Article 11, which gives Parliament the ongoing power to make laws about who is and who isn't a citizen.
And now, we get to what many people would call the very heart of the entire Constitution. This part isn't about maps or governments, it's about you. These are the core promises, the absolute protections that are guaranteed to every single citizen of India. So, what are fundamental rights, really? Well, think of them as the most basic human rights you need to live a life with dignity. But here's the game changer. They are enforceable in a court of law. This is so important. They aren't just nice suggestions or ideals on a piece of paper. They are legally binding guarantees. If someone violates them, you can take them to court. So the Constitution breaks these down into 6 big buckets. You've got the right to equality, the right to freedom, the right against exploitation, freedom of religion, cultural and educational rights, and the last one, which is kind of a one that powers all the others, the right to constitutional remedies. Let's just zoom in on a few that you probably encounter every day. Article 14, that's simple. Everyone is equal before the law. Article 17 officially abolishes the horrific practice of untouchability. Article 19 is your freedom of speech. And then there's Article 21, which is massive. It protects your life and personal liberty. And over the years, the Supreme Court has interpreted this to include all sorts of things, most famously, the right to privacy. This brings us to the real enforcement mechanism, Article 32. You should honestly think of this as your constitutional 911. It's the right that makes all the other rights real. If any of your fundamental rights are violated, Article 32 gives you the incredible power to go directly to the Supreme Court. You get to bypass all the lower courts and go straight to the top. That's how important these rights are. Okay, so if fundamental rights are what the government cannot do to you, this next section is all about what the government should try to do for you. These are called the directive principles, and they act like a moral compass or a set of goals for the government. Now, it is absolutely critical to understand the difference here. Fundamental rights are your personal shield. They're legally enforceable, you can demand them. Directive principles, on the other hand, are the government's guidebook. They are aspirational goals, the kind of country India strives to be. But you can't walk into a courtroom and sue the government for not achieving them, at least not directly. So what kind of goals are we talking about? Things like providing equal justice and free legal aid to the poor. That's in Article 39A. Or organizing village panchayats to empower local government. There's the often debated goal of a uniform civil code in Article 44. And then there are principles like separating the judiciary from the executive and promoting international peace. These are the big picture ambitions for the nation. Okay, we've got the rights and the ideals down. Now let's look at the machinery itself. This part of the Constitution is all about the nuts and bolts, the structure of the government, who holds the power, and how the country is actually run day to day. At the very top of the federal government, you have the Union Executive. Article 52 just says, hey, there's going to be a president.
But the real secret to how things work is in Article 74. It says the president must act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, which is headed by the Prime Minister. So even though the president appoints the PM, it's really the Prime Minister and their cabinet who are running the show.
And what's really interesting is how the Constitution sets up a parallel structure at the state level. The president is the head of the union, and the governor is the head of the state, and their powers are almost a mirror image of each other. The president's power to pardon someone is in Article 72. The governor's is in Article 161. The president's power to issue temporary laws called ordinances is in Article 123. The governor's is in Article 213. See the pattern?
Of course, with all these rules, you need an umpire to enforce them. That's the judiciary. Article 124 sets up the Supreme Court of India, and Article 214 does the same for high courts in the states. And hey, remember that emergency helpline, Article 32 for the Supreme Court? Well, Article 226 gives a very similar power to the high courts. They can also issue powerful legal orders known as writs to protect your rights at the state level.
All right, for our final section, let's look at the Constitution's own safety features and upgrade paths. What happens when there's a massive crisis, and how can the rulebook itself be changed to keep up with the times?
The Constitution prepares for 3 different kinds of emergencies. First, you have Article 352, a national emergency, for something huge like a war. Then there's Article 356, which is what people usually call President's Rule, where the central government can take over a state's administration. And finally, Article 360 for a financial emergency, though it's worth pointing out this has never once been used in India's history.
Now, this is maybe one of the most important sentences in the entire document. During a national emergency, a lot of your fundamental rights can be suspended by the government, but not these two. Even in the worst possible crisis, your right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 and your protection from being wrongly convicted under Article 20 are absolute. They can never, ever be taken away.
So how does a document written in the 1940s stay relevant today? The answer is Article 368. This is the engine of change. It's the article that gives Parliament the power to amend the Constitution. This is what ensures it isn't just a historical relic, but a truly living document that can evolve as India evolves.
So let's do a super quick recap. We've seen how the Constitution defines India and who its citizens are. We learned about your fundamental rights, which are your personal shield, and the directive principles, which are the government's compass. We've looked at the machinery of government, and we've understood the critical rules for emergencies and for the Constitution's own evolution.
And that brings us to the end of our little tour. But, the story of the Constitution is never really over. It's a living document that's already been changed over 100 times to meet new challenges. So I'll just leave you with this question to think about. As India moves forward, which of these articles that we talked about today do you think will be the most important in shaping its next 75 years? Thanks for joining me.